Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. This is Nasha Patel from the Early Childhood Department. Also included on this call with me is Taylor, and on the line is Catherine from GOLD. So the three of us are going to be talking to you today about the 2018-2019 next steps for GOLD users. This presentation is being recorded. The webinar recording will be available, and as well as the slides. So we'll send all of that information out over the newsletter. We're excited to talk to you today about what's happening for next year, so y'all are ready to make some decisions about how you want to move forward with GOLD for next year, and also answer any questions that you have in advance of your back-to-school planning. So we're going to talk a little bit about what happened this year in 2017-2018, and then go over our plan for 2018-2019. Then Catherine will walk us through some screenshots and examples, and we'll go through some next steps for users. We'll answer any questions you have at the end, and you can either use the chat box at the bottom. Actually, I think that's probably the best way to do it, is to use the chat box at the bottom. And if you have questions that sort of come to you after this is over, you can always email them to either me or Taylor. So let's talk a little bit about our key takeaways from 2017-2018. So as you know, we had a number of sites opt into a pilot that we offered to do an abbreviated version of GOLD. So this abbreviated version was started in the summer of 2017, and basically when we said, hey, does anybody want to try a shortened item set for GOLD? A number of you raised your hands and said, please let me try this. So we had about 1,100 sites, which is a large majority of our sites, opt into the abbreviated GOLD pilot. Because it was a smaller item set, we had to divide this license into two versions, abbreviated version 1, which was infant toddler, and abbreviated version 2, which was pre-K. And we had teachers start using these abbreviated item sets in the fall of 2017. We've had conversations in an ongoing way with both lead agencies, with teachers, with directors at sites about how this pilot has been going, and we've also been in steady and constant communication with teaching strategies about the different technological, confusion, other questions that people had about using these abbreviated item sets. It's important to note that this year we required everybody to use one version, either the abbreviated version of GOLD or the comprehensive version of GOLD. So we did require that at the site level. And what we learned was that teachers loved having an abbreviated set of items with which to assess children. They liked that there were much fewer items that they were using to assess kids. But the logistics around these shorter item sets did cause lots of headaches and lots of confusion. Particularly, we identified 4 challenges that were surfaced to us from the field. The reports were not working correctly for classrooms that were using fewer than 70% of items. So at the site or network level, you were not able to run reports on the snapshots on those classrooms and how many kids were meeting, exceeding, or below expectations. There were issues related to child age. So children in mixed-age classrooms were either being added to the wrong tools, they weren't being assessed and using the right formative there was there were particular concerns related to it. Can everyone on the line go ahead and mute their own phone?
I think that's on their end, not on our end. Their end, yeah.
Sorry, y'all. So basically, we have issues related to child age because children in mixed-age classrooms were being assessed with the incorrect tool. They were being assessed on, the infant tool if they were pre-K, or they weren't able to move up from one tool to the next. So there were lots of questions and concerns related to that. And then also, we had kids, so with the 3 licenses, Abbreviated 1, Abbreviated 2, and Comprehensive, we had kids that were actually set up with a portfolio on each license because of the confusion related to logins and concerns related to, a kid being one age in the fall and another age in the spring. So we actually did have multiple portfolios being used for each one of these kids. And because the licenses didn't talk to each other, if one community was using Abbreviated and another was using Comprehensive, if a kid went from one community to the next within a school year, they weren't able to transfer that portfolio because the licenses didn't talk. And there was just a lot of confusion around the multiple logins. Teachers weren't sure which one they were supposed to be using at any given time. So as a result, we have an implementation plan for 2018-2019 that I'm going to give you a brief overview for, and then Taylor's going to walk through in more detail. Essentially, we're going to move back to 1 Teaching Strategies Gold license for all programs. That means every user will have 1 set of login credentials to avoid the confusion that I just spoke about. The default item set that all users will see will be 70% of the complete list of items. So they won't see the comprehensive that they used to see in the past. They won't see the abbreviated set that they might have seen last year. They'll see 70% of items. For comparison, that's 11 more items than the AB2 or the pre-K version used to have. Now, users will have flexibilities in 2 ways. If a site says, I'm okay with that being able to run reports, I'm okay with that getting the full assessment item set and being able to, make determinations about the level that children are at by each dimension, then I'm going to continue to use the abbreviated item set and we'll provide guidance on what that looks like. If sites want to assess with more than 70% of the items, then Teaching Strategies Gold in the department will provide step-by-step guidance on how to add those additional items in. So there's no way to actually take items away. We can't hide items if you want to do the abbreviated version, but we will provide the information on how you can basically not complete items that you don't want to complete, and we'll show you how you can add items in if the 70% is too limiting for you, if you really want the comprehensive experience. So I'm going to hand this over to Taylor to walk us through what this looks like. Okay, so we think this diagram is really helpful in thinking about the options that sites will have for next year's implementation of Gold. So all users, when they log in, are going to see this new default 70% set. That's what everyone will see when they log in. However, as Nasha just mentioned, if users want to continue using either the abbreviated 2 or the abbreviated 1 item set, they will have the option to do that at the site level by completing fewer items. They will either leave those items blank or they will mark not observed, and we will go into more detail about how that will be done later in this presentation. And also, they will have the opportunity to add more items. So if a site or even a particular classroom says 70% isn't enough to meet my students' needs, they can go back in and manually add up to the comprehensive item set or even up to the full set that's offered by TS Gold. Anything above that 70%, essentially once a classroom hits that 70%, they will have full reporting capabilities. And for that reason, we're asking that if sites choose to complete less than 70% of items by sticking with AB1 or AB2, that decision needs to be made at the site level. So if one site says we're going to do 70%, that means every classroom within that site has to do 70%. They can't pick and choose which classrooms are going to be abbreviated and which classrooms are not. So this is the crosswalk. I'm going to actually show you what each dimension is going to look like. So the dimension you see here is social emotional. On the far left-hand side, you see all of the items that TS Gold offers, all of the objectives that fall within the social emotional dimension. In the blue, you have the 3 choices. So on the left-hand side, you have the new default, which is 70% of items. In the middle, you have the original item set, which we call the comprehensive set. And on the right-hand side, you see the abbreviated pilot. So you can look across these rows and see which items are included in the new default 70% that were not included in the comprehensive and how they overlap with abbreviated. Also, we're including here what is included in the Kea assessment, as well as what will be made available in OSEP. So I'm going to go through each of these dimensions with you just so you can sort of get a preview of what this will look like, but we're going to make this available in guidance fairly soon. So you'll have a one-pager that has each of these dimensions and exactly what's going to be included in the 70%. Here's the crosswalk for physical. So you'll notice for physical, the item set overlaps with the comprehensive set and the abbreviated item set pretty closely. Here's language. Language is all of the items that were included in AB2 and almost all of the items that were included in AB1. Here's cognitive. This is a reduction of 3 items from the comprehensive set, and there's considerable overlap with abbreviated 1 and abbreviated 2. Here's literacy, which has 5 fewer items than the comprehensive set, and again, there's a lot of overlap with AB2. Here's math, which has 3 fewer items than the comprehensive set and has 3 more items than AB2. And this is what other looks like. None of the items 24 through 38 will be required in the 70% default, whereas many of them were required in the comprehensive set. So this is a significant reduction from comprehensive. Okay, so a couple things to note. Like I mentioned, if you want to refer back to that, which I'm sure many of you will, we'll make that available both in this slideshow but also as a one-pager. For folks who decide at the site level to continue using the abbreviated pilot, either AB1 or AB2 or a combination of both of those, there's a few things that we need to make very clear. First, for those sites, there's not going to be a way to actually pull off the items from the 70% that aren't included in AB1 or AB2. So for every single checkpoint, when those teachers log in to complete the checkpoint, they're going to see the 70% of items. However, we're going to provide guidance that will instruct them which items to either leave blank or to mark not observed, such that they're only actually completing the items that are included in AB1 or AB2, depending on the age group of the children. This does not solve the problem around AB1 or AB2, not those classrooms not having full reporting capabilities. So the administrators at sites that opt to use fewer than 70% of items are still going to run into the exact same reporting challenges as they had last year. And then also notably networks that have a mix of sites, some of which that are using AB1 or AB2 and some of which are using 70%, their reports are not going to show 100% completion because the sites that opt into AB1 and AB2 are going to leave items blank, and those items are always going to reduce the 100% completion rate. But again, we're going to provide ample guidance so that you know what to look for, you know how to do monitoring on these particular sites, And later in this presentation, Catherine's going to talk a little bit more about what that will look like. So Nasha already sort of mentioned some of the benefits of this, but just really outlining what we see as the major benefits of this solution. First and foremost, moving back to one license will allow children to be seamlessly transferred from classroom to classroom, from site to site, and we see that as really, really important in terms of following a child's progression from entering the system all the way through. Also, this solution eliminates all of that confusion around having multiple logins. I know there were multiple times when I went to log into the comprehensive system last year and accidentally typed in my username for AB1 or AB2, and we think this confusion was happening a lot for teachers, administrators, lead agencies, so we're happy that this problem is going to be eliminated. And then last, offering 70% as the default is going to meet the needs of most users, we expect. It is still an abbreviated item set compared to the comprehensive list. Like Nasha said, it's only 11 additional items above AB2, but once you hit that 70%, you have full reporting capabilities, which will also allow student learning targets to be set more efficiently, and this meets all requirements for Head Start and any other requirements and unlocks all of the reports that TS Gold offers. So this is a little bit of a preview of what this timeline is going to look like. So by July 1st, we're going to set up all accounts such that everyone can log into their original comprehensive account. So we're moving back to that original login. So if you still have login credentials from the comprehensive license, that's the exact same login that you'll use in this coming year. And at that point on July 1st, the abbreviated login, so AB1 and AB2 from last year, will be shut down. We're going to talk a little bit about what that means for users toward the end of this presentation, because there are some steps that you need to take in order to prepare for those two accounts to be shut down. In early August, guidance is going to be released to support users in the field through the lead agency back to school email. So in that email, we're going to include quite a bit of guidance around what this process is going to look like. We're going to include the crosswalk, how to set up children in TS Gold, etc. No later than August 1st, we are going to have the system set up such that users will be able to go in and set up their children, enter informational metrics data, and all data will correctly save at that point. And then in October, users will be able to go in and complete the first checkpoint. Okay, so now I'm going to pass it over to Catherine, and she's going to walk us through some screenshots and examples. Give us a minute, technologically wise, to make this happen. Catherine, can you go ahead and try to speak and see if it's working? Hello. Can everyone hear me? Can you raise a hand if you can hear me? Great. Okay, perfect. So super glad to be here. Thank you, Taylor, for the introduction. So what this looks like is the standard default item set selection. So if you were to log in and you were to complete your checkpoint process with just the items in your tool, this is what your checkpoint process would look like. That's ideal because this should be very familiar. This would be just like you're logging in and completing a checkpoint as you normally would. There's a lot of benefits to this that Taylor's already gone over. So namely, administrators and teachers will be able to run a snapshot report and successfully run assessment status reports. You'll also be able to move children from between classrooms, since everyone will be under the same license, which is a thing that we weren't able to do last year because we had so many different licenses configured. So this is going to be what the normal experience looks like if you are to just log in and complete a checkpoint as you always have. This is what you would do. So let me go to what the options are going to look like if you want to continue with pursuing an abbreviated checkpoint. So there's going to be two different ways to pursue continuing with an abbreviated item set should you decide that that's the direction you want to go. Option one is that you would require your teachers only complete items that are in the item set for AB1 or AB2, depending on the age of the classroom. What this will mean is that teachers will be able to complete a checkpoint, but not finalize a checkpoint. And that's an important distinction because when you look at the assessment status report, what that means is that you're never going to see the green bar turn green. It's always going to stay orange. It's always going to look unfinalized. And your percent is always going to be less than 100%. But that being said, the state will still be able to get the information it needs to be able to assess that site or that program should you choose this path. And as a reminder, the snapshot report will only work in a limited fashion. So this past year, the snapshot report for AB1 pilots only worked in the physical area, and in the AB2 pilot only worked in the physical and language areas. And that would continue to be the case this following year. The second option would be to mark an item not observed, and we have guidance in the next couple of slides to show exactly how to do that. The benefit of pursuing this method is that it will allow you to actually finalize a checkpoint. So the checkpoint status will show at 100%. It does add an extra step to the work. The snapshot report will also continue to work in the fashion that it has, so that remains unchanged. The benefit is that the assessment status report then does work to accurately reflect the finalization status of the checkpoint as intended. So let's get into what this actually looks like for both of these options. So if I were to pursue completing a checkpoint by leaving items blank, this is what my screen would look like. I would have these orange circles to show that I have completed assessing on that item. I have not yet finalized it. You'll note that for several items, I've got just orange circles that are empty, and that's because I have nothing there. This would be what the AB1 pilot would look like, and these items would be blank. So they would continue to stay blank. The others I would make sure are completed, and I would do that by the checkpoint date, due date. What would then happen is that to actually understand where my teacher is in terms of completion as an administrator, I would run the assessment status report but pull it at the classroom level since the finalized data will not be showing at the site or program level. This is what the second option would look like. So if I decide that I'm going to pursue the AB1 or AB2 pilot but mark not observed, I would actually do that at the child level. So I would go into the individual items, and then when I go to click on the child, I'm select not observed. Now typically this is only used for two reasons. It's used for a child that's recently enrolled and you don't have enough time to accurately assess that child, or for excessive absences, and again, you're unable to accurately assess that child. In this instance, you would select Other as the option, and for the comment field, you would enter Not Required as part of this item set. What this will allow you to do is actually run the assessment status report and have it accurately reflect the checkpoint status for your site. And so those are the major pieces of distinction between both of those options. Either option is still going to require a added level of work in that either the reports are going to be a little bit more challenging to navigate to see where your teachers are, or you're going to be asking teachers to take an extra step to mark a child as not observed to participate in the item set. So those are trade-offs that are part and parcel to these options, but we do feel strongly about offering the flexibility for them to still be available. And so if you are interested in pursuing an abbreviated item set for this upcoming year, this is how you would be able to do that. And then you'll also be able, if you would like, to add additional items into the set. You'll be able to do that as well. And so this is a screenshot of actually going into the classroom management. You'll be able to do this at the class or the site. And as the state's already said, we are encouraging these decisions to be made at the site level. But if you are already participating in the 70% classroom, adding items, you'll be able to add them in. And this is where I would note that you'll see I've already got items that are grayed out on this list. That means that those are required for me. There's nothing I can do to check or uncheck those items. The only items I can take any action on are the ones that have a blank box next to the item. And for that, I would be able to click into that box, which would give it a check mark, and then click Save. And once I've clicked Save, it will apply that item for my classroom through the entire school year. So I want to get into the support that we'll be providing for each of those workflows and how we'll continue to support Louisiana moving forward. So we are actively engaging with the Louisiana Department of Education Early Childhood team to build out specific engagement sessions with relevant content throughout the year, especially given the new workflows that we'll be introducing this year. We're going to continue to host regularly scheduled town halls to make sure that we're aligned, gathering feedback, and able to provide transparency and additional ways to answer questions. We will also continue to have the Louisiana support line, which I have here, and the general email. And I would also note we're going to be releasing more supports and resources in the beginning of August to communicate these changes and provide more guidance on expectations moving forward. An important part of this has been the increased coordination between the Louisiana Department of Education and Teaching Strategies to identify and address urgent needs as they're raised by various communities. I'll be honest and say that when we started this project, we were probably meeting on a bi-weekly basis, and we've seen those meetings grow to multiple times a week, and as it should. We really believe in the partnership and believe in supporting the partnership and are eager to create content and support throughout the year, and looking forward to starting that chapter. So next steps for users, I will be pivoting after this slide into Gold itself to actually show how to do some of these things and make sure that we answer some of those questions. Some important things that you'll want to make sure you do as soon as possible will be to run a data export and save the file to your desktop so that you can continue to access child-level data from the abbreviated pilots moving forward. And I will show exactly how to do that very soon. We also are going to recommend that teachers and administrators save documentation of professional development and to download those and save that offline so that you are able to provide certification of the courses that you've completed in the abbreviated pilot. I would clarify that if you have courses and certificates of completion for things that you have done in the original comprehensive license, those will be coming back because we will be moving to the original license. So on the flip side, if you have certifications that were in the old system that you did not get access to this year, those certifications will be coming back. But if you did complete a new certification this year, it will be important that you download the certificate of completion for either that course or certificate for the IRR before that pilot is shut down. Then we'll also want to begin preparing for access to the original comprehensive license login, which we'll be sharing more information about in the weeks to come. So on that note, let me go ahead and share my screen and walk through what the data export is going to look like. All right. Can everyone see my screen here? So what you're going to do to access the data export is you navigate to Reports, and then when you scroll down, there will be an option for data export at the bottom here. And so you're going to want to go to that report, and then you'll want to download the information that you need to. So you'll be able to select the checkpoint period. You'll be able to have if you want to have the fields stamped for each checkpoint period, you can do so. You want to select the sites, teachers, classes affected, and then you would click Export. Once you click Export, it's going to show up in your reports queue, and it will just show up as the data export, and you would download it from here. And so you would click this download file, and then once you've downloaded that, save it, keep it in a safe place, and that's how you will continue to have access to your checkpoint period information for children for checkpoints completed in the abbreviated pilot last year. If you completed courses in the abbreviated pilot, you'll want to make sure that you navigate over to the My Courses area. If you've completed this course, it would show up at 100%, and there would be a button in the middle of this circle where you would be able to download the certificate. So you want to make sure that you take that step to actually save the certificate so that you can verify throughout the year to your teams and to the state that you did complete that training. As an administrator, you'll also be able to navigate to the Professional Development and Learning Report, which should be located under the Reports area and only available as an administrator. But you'll be able to run this online professional development report and verify who needs to download which pieces of information moving forward. So that's what I was intending to share today. Let's take a look at the chat window and see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Catherine. If any of the attendees have questions, please just go ahead and type them into the chat window, and we'll stay on the line for a while and continue answering those questions. If anybody's having trouble typing a question into the chat box, you can raise your hand and let us know. Otherwise, just use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to type in your questions. Now everyone should be able to see the chat box, so we can take questions that way. Sorry about that, guys.
So Monica's question is, the default is only 70%, but a program that would like to use 100%, will the program have to add the other objectives themselves? And the answer is yes. It's not difficult to do, and you can do it pretty easily. But essentially what you would do is you would go in and you would add those other items. I will say that if you're a Head Start grantee and you're concerned about being able to use all of the, be able to report all of the things you need to report, the 70% item list will be enough for you. I will also say that there are items that were not included in the comprehensive set that are also part of gold that you can also add in. So for example, when you look at this physical dimension, there's items that we didn't have as part of our original Louisiana item set. You can always at any time go ahead and add those in. But what we'll show for everyone is the default 70%, which is the minimum number of items required to run the reports that need to be run and to finalize checkpoints. Above and beyond, you can do the Louisiana item set, which you see the check marks here for. You could add additional items in, as many as you want. You may want everybody to see the OSEP indicators. You can do that as well. So you have lots of options in terms of going above and beyond the 70%, but you have to at least meet the 70%.
And once you manually add those additional items, they will appear at every checkpoint. So it is a little bit of extra work at the beginning, but you don't have to do that for every checkpoint throughout the year.
Lots of questions. Okay, so somebody else asked that they had a question with the echo. So the PowerPoint slides and the recording will be sent out in the newsletter, and we'll also post them on the Early Childhood Library, so you'll have access to both of these things. Somebody also asked if the 70% item set will work for OSEP. OSEP has a specific set of requirements around what gets included in for the purposes of their reporting, and we've flagged this here so you can see where the overlap is with the 70% and where they have additional items that would be required. And this will also be included in that one-pager that we will be publishing, so you'll have access to that both. Catherine, if you could respond to Lakeisha's question in the chat box, will the data export only cover checkpoints? Do you have to go to different reports and download all of those reports as well? For our purpose, the data export covers what you need to cover, which is the checkpoints. But if you want other reports, I'm not sure if there's other places that you would need to go to get that. Yes, and Ivy is correct. So just to clarify, there's this license, which is the early childhood license, that's going to show 70% of items. If you are using gold, if you are an OSEP coordinator, you know that we're transitioning from AEPS to gold for the purposes of OSEP reporting. That will be a different license, and that license will show the OSEP requirements. So there'll be the early childhood license, that'll show the 70% of items. If you're a special education coordinator or doing gold for OSEP purposes, you'll log into the OSEP license and you'll see the OSEP items. If you were previously using the comprehensive version but you've forgotten your login credentials as part of the work that we're doing to go back to one license, we'll provide you with the information about how to reset your password or access your former login credentials. So we'll make sure that we are communicating that information to you. Yes, and as IB noted, the KEA license is also a separate license. It's actually not one license, but it's individually district-held licenses. So those are separate from the state license. And as you know, the separate licenses do not talk to each other. So the early childhood license will be one license, the OSEP license will be another, the KEA licenses are separate, and those licenses don't talk to each other. So Belinda's asking, will ECSE teachers use both licenses or just the OSEP license? They will complete documentation under one license, OSEP, and that's a good question. So basically, early childhood teachers, the ones who've been using GOLD 3 times a year, they'll continue to use GOLD the way they have been before. The people who are new to GOLD, who will be using this for OSEP, they use it a little bit differently, where they're not doing GOLD 3 times a year, but they're actually doing it on entry and exit for these children. So they'll be doing that within the OSEP license. However, early childhood teachers and the early childhood SPED coordinators or special education teachers can share documentation. So if one teacher, identifies a particular piece of documentation that works for a set of indicators, they can provide that to that other teacher to enter it for the OSEP license. But those will still be 2 separate licenses, and the OSEP license will be used specifically for the OSEP reporting purposes. So St. Tammany is asking, if we have children that qualify for LA4 and have an IEP and exit at the end of the year, what do they use? So that child will have 2 portfolios. They'll have their regular portfolio in early childhood, and then they'll have their OSEP, their portfolio for the purposes of OSEP reporting, where they'll collect the information for entry and exit. And we can talk more about that. We will have specific guidance and communication for folks around the OSEP license. So St. Tammany's asking, there's no way for these licenses to speak to each other. Teachers have to enter items twice. They're actually being used for 2 different purposes, right? So for the OSEP license, they can, but they won't be required to be doing checkpoints 3 times a year on those kids. That's specifically in the early childhood license. The OSEP license is for collecting information at entry and at exit and meeting those OSEP reporting requirements. They can use the same documentation for that, but they have to do it on different timelines and in different ways. So we're continuing to think about what the process could look like to facilitate more collaboration, but the first step is to just get everybody using the same tool so that there's sort of an alignment on what we're looking for, and then the next set of steps can be about, and how do we make this a more collaborative process. If there are no other questions, Catherine actually wants to show us one other report, the user report option. So I'm going to unmute her so that she can do that, and then we can sort of come back to any questions that y'all have. Thank you, Nasha. I wanted to show something else quickly as we're talking about things that make sense to do before the year. I know that the state has various requests from you for teacher certifications and things like that, and I just want to show briefly how you would be able to use some of these new features. So now you actually can run a report for users and be able to have more information when you run that report. So let me go here. So when I see this gear, select columns to display, I click that gear and I'm now able to add columns that I want to show in that portfolio. So for example, if I want to verify and just make sure or have a copy of the certificate numbers that I've entered into the system for users, and I want to track this box of having the teaching certificate at the user level, and having passed the inter-rater reliability, I'm able to check those columns, save, and then export and download that report. That functionality is something that is new, and we will certainly review this as we get closer to back to school as well, but wanted to highlight another useful thing that you can do before we do leave the abbreviated license. So that's what I was planning to see. Are there additional questions? I would also note that you would be able to do this at the classroom level as well. So for some of those custom fields that you enter for class ratios like that, that will also show up as an option to download in that report. So that's what I have. Nasha, you can take it away. So somebody asked about APT training on the horizon. In terms of early childhood, not at the moment, but there are some APT trainings being offered specifically for OSAP. And if you have questions about that, you should contact Melissa, whose contact information we can provide if you need it. All right, great. If there are no other questions, we will end this webinar. If you have additional questions